Friends, families, loved ones, welcome back to The Grand Weaver. I am Ron Franklin, your co-host alongside my friend, Eric Henry. And we have a special, like always, moment to connect you and your story and how God has woven it together, perhaps through the lives of folks like Jenni Lord, who is representing Chosen. We will get a chance to explore her story. And before we do so, we're going to pass it over to Eric because the nature of many of our relationships with our guests have been filtered or facilitated through his relationships and movements throughout the world that have brought us into connection with folks who have inspired us. And so, Eric, I'm going to pass it to you and let you introduce Jenni to us and start their story.
Absolutely. It started on a spring day in 2022. Many of you have hopefully heard the story of the Grand Weaver and the prompting and all of these things, and this time I had in Nashville and how it formed even where we are today. Well, one of those things was this really nice woman sitting in my seat at Bridgestone Arena on Good Friday. So I met this really nice lady. Her name was Jenni, and she had this passion, clear passion for kids, and started sharing about this thing that she's doing. And so that is how I met Jenni Lord a few years ago, was because she was in my seat. And then I just sat next to her and we started chatting. And so it was kind of fun. And so today I'm so excited to have you, Jenni, and hear a bit more about Chosen and the heart behind Chosen. And so with that, I'm going to kick it back to Ron for a few questions.
Well, Jenni, thank you for joining us. I should mention, because your title is of significance in my work. So I'm an academe, and sometimes doors are open or closed based on either letters in front of or behind your name. You are the Chief Executive Officer of The Chosen. Tell us a little bit about what your organization is/does, and if you don't mind humoring us, tell us about the origin. Where did this all begin for you? What captured your heart, and how did it lead you to where you are today with this organization, The Chosen?
Awesome. Well, guys, it's so great to be with you this afternoon. And Eric, I had forgotten that. And you just let everybody know how I tried to steal your seat. Oh, you're so gracious. It's great to be with you guys, and I'm excited for our conversation. So I started the organization Chosen, not The Chosen, but just Chosen. We're happy to share the name. We had it first. So started it 15 years ago. And it was really birthed out of my own passion for foster care and adoption. I have a brother who was adopted out of foster care, and he came into our family when I was a teenager, and he was just a toddler. We're 17 years apart. And that experience profoundly shaped my life for the last 30 years and has now shaped my career as well. His adoption journey took about 5 years. And through that, I saw the inside of the child welfare system. And God used that experience to break my heart for what I saw, that a system that's designed to protect children oftentimes brings them more harm, and lit a passion inside of me to do something about what I saw that just was unacceptable to me. And so I had the privilege of an idea, I would say a God-inspired idea, in the fall of 2008 to help families who wanted to adopt. And I wanted to see loving families who were open to welcoming a child into their home. I wanted to see them be able to do that. We, as you probably know, have a worldwide orphan crisis with over 160 million orphans worldwide. We have a foster care crisis in our own country. Numbers have varied since I've been in this space, between 400,000 and 500,000 kids in our backyards who need a safe, loving family to be with, right? So how Chosen began is different than what we do today. But in the beginning, we were helping to fund adoptions and did that over the course of about 5 years, had the immense privilege to fund almost 400 adoptions. And then we took a mission evolution, a turn, if you will, into what we do today.
Oh, there are so many questions and pathways that have kind of been sparked in just hearing this introduction. One thing that kind of caught my heart, you mentioned that what you saw, experienced, tugged at your heart. Talk to us a little bit about those, as much as you feel comfortable with. What was happening that you saw that needed a remedy?
Oh, goodness. Well, we're not going to take the whole time today to talk about all of the things that need remedy. Eric's laughing because he knows a little bit about this. But, it was one thing after another. I just saw the bureaucracy that prevented a child from having permanency quickly. Obviously, there's due process. And if and when possible, a child can be reunified with their birth family, that's certainly the desire. And in our case, it wasn't possible, but it was complicated because it was across state lines. So that extended the timeline. And I just saw how one thing after another, the state continued to buy time, extending the case. And there were years that my brother had birth family visits, and years that he didn't. So that can be further traumatizing, causing just more angst and pain. And it was difficult to see him suffer through that time. And just knowing that, man, it doesn't have to be this hard, right? I also saw how with the bureaucracy, when cases change hands and so forth, details get lost, important details.
Sure. Yeah.
And now in my professional world, I see how kids get lost in the system where they're not even being tracked any longer, especially when they're across state lines. And I can share some details on that, but just those sorts of things. And you're like, this little innocent child, this precious child created in the image of God, surely there's a better way to protect him and make sure that he doesn't just have physical safety, but he also has emotional safety and well-being as well.
So 400 kids you had the privilege of helping get adopted. Now, what was the transition, the evolution? What was the thing that happened that caused the shift in your ministry? I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I like to say that we never know what's on the other side of our obedience yes to the Lord, right? So this like crazy God idea. You have your own testimony of that, right? This crazy God idea. I was running. I had a 3-year-old, 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. I was trying to get back in shape, running my first half marathon. And I just had this crazy idea about how to use running to help families and put those things together, and it blew up, right? So we were funding adoptions through this race of all things for years. And at the end of 2014, so almost 10 years ago, my eyes were opened to another aspect of this crisis, which was good-hearted, well-meaning, well-intentioned people were putting kids back into the system because of the trauma that they had experienced, the children had experienced, and the behaviors that caused in the homes. And so I did not know that you could dissolve an adoption until 10 years ago. Did y'all know that? You can
No.
like rehome a child. And same thing with foster care. People were saying, yes, I'll, sign up to bring a child into my home. And then they were quitting because it was so hard. And my question to our team was, how can we serve families better? My heart was really broken at imagining a child experiencing that sense of abandonment again, compounding the loss that they had, their first loss, and being removed from their birth family. I just couldn't stand it. And so I felt like we had a stewardship responsibility. In addition to helping to fund adoptions, we were bringing a ton of awareness and advocacy around this issue and inviting people in to be part of the solution. And then my question was, who's walking with them long-term to help their children heal and to make sure they can keep going, that they stay together as a family. My own childhood, there's a lot of brokenness and instability. I understand the pain of that. And I know God's heart for family. It was the first institution he created in the garden, right?
Yeah.
He is for the family. He is for the restoration of families. And so with that question of how can we serve families better, that led us on a prayer journey of what would it look like? Who's walking alongside these families and doing it well? And honestly, we went to some of the leaders in the country and asked the same question. They were like, we don't know. People are calling us in crisis every week. If you find somebody, let us know. And we decided to create something we were hoping to replicate, and decided to create what is now called a model of care to come alongside families and empower parents and caregivers to be an agent of healing for their children in their own home, to build healthy relational connection. What science and data shows us is that the brain that has been traumatized can actually heal through healthy relational connection. And so that's our aim.
Yeah. Jenni, that's a really powerful testimony for a person who comes from a background in counseling. Personally, for me, in terms of my master's pathway, I think I was kind of scratching at similar questions in terms of what does healing and restoration look like. You mind reflecting on us with us on this idea of what that healing journey might look like? And I think in multiple directions, not only for the family, but also for the youth that have come together. And I even wonder about the ecosystem altogether that those children are connected with. So, let alone the system, but their parents, right? Talk to us about how the ripple effect, perhaps, of this healing journey of restoration of health through the trauma.
Yeah, so I'll touch on something that is, I would say, not common knowledge, and which is part of the problem. We have so many players in this space, from the state to the church to community outreach, organizations that are all trying to solve these issues and reverse the crisis. And what is missing, in our humble estimation, is an understanding of the problem of broken relational connection. So when a child has been harmed by their primary caregivers, the ones that God designed to care for them, that is a deep wound, right? The word for trauma, the Greek word for trauma, is wound. It's a deep wound. And then there's a separation. So it even for very young children, that impacts the way that they're going to relate to the world. It impacts the way they're going to relate to people and their sense of safety, their identity. And so our system is designed around physical welfare. Are the locks in place? Are the outlets covered? Are the guns and ammunition put up? I live in Texas. So they're looking at that, and they're not talking about a child needing psychological safety. Sometimes in the business world, we call it felt safety. I need to feel safe in this conversation to be authentic and vulnerable, right? I trust Eric because of our shared history. So children coming into a new home, they're not going to have that automatically. So new parents, caregivers are like, yay, they're here. And the kids and the way that they distance themselves often shows up in behaviors. And that's a fear response in the brain. So because of that trauma that they've experienced, their brains live in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, where they don't have the language to articulate why they are scared. But it shows up in big behaviors, explosions, sometimes aggression or violence, even very young children, where they don't have the language to even articulate that story. And so parents are unfortunately woefully unprepared. And I've been a foster parent. I know the training, but we do a better job in training parents for what's coming. But you're not, until the child with the need is right in front of you, melting down, and now you're melting down, you may not know how to respond to that in a trauma responsive way that's actually going to build connection, helping that child to regulate and calm down. And that's our aim. So that was a very deep response to your question, but you have to understand the problem. That lack of, because of what's happened to them, the lack of attachment that can form easily, like it would with your biological children who've been I have 4 kids. They were formed in my womb. They've been safe with me since the beginning of their life. There's an automatic trust that has been established because of years of incremental doses of healthy connection. And these kids don't have that. So that's the starting place, is just understanding the problem.
It strikes me as you're sharing, like, first, the phrase that's going through my mind is, Lord, break my heart for what breaks yours. And that's what I hear out of you is your heart's been broken for the things that break God's heart. And you state something that is so abundantly obvious when you say it, but yet we never think about it. We think so much about our physical safety and are we keeping kids safe in that way, yet so little do we think about all the trauma. And so I think that's why I resonated with you immediately, just bringing awareness even to myself as I think about these things often, and I have very little idea. I just have very little idea. So thank you. I'm just pausing to say thank you in the midst to help us understand a little more clearly the root of the problem, right? And that's so. Ron, you got another great question.
Well,
I probably didn't answer his original question.
No, that's you, Jenni. You are doing wonderfully, my friend. This is it's like it feels like an opportunity to learn for me, and what I'm always inspired by is the stories behind those learnings as well. So, is there a reflection that you can share with us in terms of how you all have come alongside a family, a child, the system to help ensure that the care is appropriate for the trauma in such a way that it cultivates connection and relationship that is restorative, like we see it in our relationship with our creator and we try to replicate in our own homes?
Yes, Ron, you hit the nail on the head. That's what we're sharing with families, is exactly what you just said. God is always pursuing connection with us. And we're teaching parents and caregivers to always pursue their child's heart, to pursue that connection. So a family that we've served just recently shared their story with me. So incredibly powerful. They have 3 biological boys, like 8 to 12. And they brought in a nephew, which is very common relative caregivers. They brought in a nephew to their home. He lived in a different state. I'm going to reference back to how kids fall through the cracks here in a minute.
Yeah.
And he was 11 years old. He had his whole life been exposed to unimaginable terror. His mother she has a severe substance abuse issue.
Yeah.
And he's experienced a tremendous amount of neglect, some physical abuse, and they did it because it was family and because they wanted to reflect the gospel. They told their boys, this is an opportunity for us to live out the gospel for a child in need. And so they brought him in about a year ago, and the level of trauma, if you just touch them, hey buddy, just jumping, like he was so unaccustomed to just regular communication in a cohesive family unit, exposed to maybe not knowing when he was going to eat again. He was severely developmentally delayed in some areas, hadn't been in school consistently. And you take him out of state, put him into a new family that is a beautiful family, highly functional people. And his world just got turned upside down because what is normative to him, nothing in his world looked normative anymore. Was not even sure about certain silverware, like what was in front of him. Could he ask for more? Didn't know how to ask for more. Very, I call just like normal, basic things in a family. And unable to share about what he had been through. And so families just trying to navigate around establishing some sense of normalcy. And oftentimes, Ron, you know this with a counseling background, when a child has experienced that sort of trauma, really any kind of trauma for a sustained period of time, there are going to be developmental delays. Yeah. So a child who's 11, like him, his response, he may look like a 4-year-old responding to kind of basic things like, hey, buddy, we don't leave our shoes by the door. You got to take your shoes to your room, could turn into a 30-minute meltdown. And so very unpredictable and also challenging. Imagine they have kids 8 to 12. So they know what 11 looks like. Yep. And it looks nothing like that with this child. So what we do is, and with this family, we do this with all the families that we work with, they come in, we look at not just the child's history, but the family history as well. Oftentimes there's unhealed trauma with mom and dad that's interacting in the family. Most of the families, about 80% of them that come to us are in a state of crisis. This family was proactive. We had a relationship with them before he came into the home, so they immediately said, we're going to need your services. Yeah. Thank God. But typically that is not the case. They're coming to us saying, this is too hard. We can't keep going. I'm scared they're running my other kids. Our marriage is strained. These are the types of things that we're hearing from families. And we want them to keep going, right? And so we want them to be empowered with those tools. So we do a family history, not just of the child, but everybody that's in the home. We look at trauma symptoms in the child, looking at 13 different domains. So things like depression, anxiety, PTSD. And we're also measuring parental stress levels and the protective factors in the home. Super important. It gives us a comprehensive picture of what are the family's needs. And then we develop an individualized roadmap that we call the trauma responsive action plan. That's going to govern how we walk alongside a family for about 6 months, typically 4 to 6 months, depends on level of need. And we start working with them the parents and the caregivers, equipping them and empowering them with trauma responsive tools that are going to build healthy connection. So as an example, we see this a lot. Kids who may have really struggle at bath time. For whatever reason, there are things that have happened to them in the past that were, or they haven't had consistency of what you and I might think about bath time looks like. Total meltdown, disrupts the whole household, leads an evening to be. So we're going to address that right away. Okay, bath time is going to need to look different. Let him pick out his own kind of sponge. He could stand at the kitchen sink and dab his body. He doesn't have to go full immersion. Like there's baby steps. And just very practical tools to start eliminating some of those trauma responses, but are showing compassion for the child that's in front of them to meet those needs. One of the things we tell parents is there's always meaning behind the behavior. There's strategies. And so helping a parent to get really curious about what's behind the behavior, what's the need behind the behavior. And so we do that. We walk alongside them, empowering them, holding them accountable to making the changes in their home to build that healthy connection. And then they typically are with us for about 6 months. We measure those stress levels again at the end of that to make sure everything is going in the right direction. And the beautiful thing is we see parents not just, they start to recognize their progress because we're asking them every week, what went well this past week? And sometimes they're digging hard. But to see those incremental doses of change and building that connection where a child's behaviors start to calm down, that's what we're after.
So Jenni, how do you deliver these services as you are walking alongside families, and maybe even touch a little bit on the footprint of Chosen and the reach of your organization?
Sure. So we have a telehealth model that we developed back in we started doing telehealth in 2017. It set us up really well for the pandemic. And honestly, that was in response to the needs that were coming to us. So I'm based in South Central Texas. We started a pilot in my area with what we were doing. And y'all, within like 4 months, people were calling us from around the country saying, I heard you worked with the Franklin family. I heard you worked with Eric. Can you help us? We're desperate. We've tried everything. We've been to every type of counseling. And counseling is valuable. Ron, that's your background. I have a background in some counseling as well, both personally and in education. And there is value to that, and we don't want to diminish that or replace that. But a child is not going to heal in a therapist's office once a week or twice a month. The caregiver is the one that can be the agent of change, because again, going back to that family system that God designed, the parents are the primary adults that are going to be interacting with that child on a consistent basis. They are the ones that need to be equipped. The incredible thing is we see clinical results, clinical numbers come down of depression, anxiety, those things that I mentioned before, just by giving the parents the right tools and resources that they need. So Eric, the short answer to your question is we serve families from around the country. We've been doing that for years now and continuing to scale and grow our footprint across the country.
Jenni, can you give us your this is a selfish request, but the brag points. So oftentimes, I'm from Kansas City, and we call Missouri the show me state. So it's like, hey, you have been doing this incredible work in serving families. Like, what have been the outcomes? What are you seeing in families' lives? You mentioned the incremental change that parents are able, or caregivers are able to recognize as things progress. What do the students say? What do the numbers say on those anxiety and kind of depression levels? What are you seeing as the outcome of you all's service to the world and to these families?
Yeah, so I'll give you just some quick stats from this past year. We saw a 67% decrease in anxiety and anger in overall, and the numbers that we were serving with the youth that we're measuring. And in the past 9 years, we've had a 99% success rate of keeping families together. That's the ultimate marker for us. Making sure that they can keep going. And the things that we hear on the front end from their stories, and I can't imagine getting to this place as a parent where the desperation that you feel of like, this is too hard. This is ruining my family. We think we made a mistake. We thought we heard from God. Now we're not sure. Like, those are the sorts of things that we're hearing, and worse. People tell us things that they're not saying any, and they don't know how to share those things. But to see a 99% success rate of families stay together. So we measure at 6 months, the conclusion of services, 12 months, and 18 months, because we want to ensure that there's continued progress. And you know this, Ron. Unfortunately, trauma is developmental. So the family may hit another really tough period at adolescence or in teenage years where they need to come back, but we want to stay connected to those families and be that safe place for them if or when they may need services again. So I love to share that we've had a 99% success rate. I think that's amazing. The other thing I'll tell you is, so often when families come to us, and this is indicative of the state problems as well, the strategy for dealing with hard, big behaviors has become call the police or send them to the psych hospital, which is more trauma. It's another separation. A psych hospital is a 5 to 7 day stay of stabilization, where there's probably going to be more medication and maybe more diagnoses, but it's not contributing to the healing of the child, right? So we don't want that to be the go-to strategy. We are trying to minimize the trauma response with these kiddos. And last year we had an 89% success rate of keeping kids from being re-hospitalized who had a previous hospitalization. So that's extremely significant. And just think about cost savings alone, not to mention the overall impact on well-being, right?
So how do people become even aware of your services? Because I know some of the people that I walk with in life and the stories that they share as they're walking through things with their kids and feeling at a loss and not even aware of the services that different organizations provide. So how would somebody even find Chosen?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. So we are working really hard on awareness around the country. We want people to find us before they dissolve their placement, right? So in addition to word of mouth, obviously, and really most people come to us through a referral a friend or family member or through another organization, a church, another mental health provider. We do work with a number of different states who also send referrals to us. But we have, I've been talking today about how we serve families every day. We call that our ground strategy. That is day in, day out, what our exceptional team is doing to keep families together. But we also have an aerial strategy, and that aerial strategy is intended to do exactly what you're talking about. Get the word out about what the problem is, what the options are, and also help train others with what we know. And what we found to be so powerful in helping kids to heal. So we feel like we have a stewardship responsibility. I mentioned that earlier, and I take that very seriously. We can't grow the ground game fast enough to meet the demand that there is, but we can certainly share with others what it is that we're doing. So through that aerial strategy, that, comes with branding and messaging and things that are helping to get the word out. Things like this podcast. I do a lot of talking and writing to help influence change and ask provocative questions to produce that change.
So if you could share maybe one of your bigger initiatives. I know you and I talked a few months ago about on the aerial strategy. How would you equip or even multiply your resources? Because you mentioned the demand is far greater than the resources at this point. So maybe if you could share with our audience how they might be able to come and help and come alongside Chosen and support the things that you're doing on the ground, or even supporting some of the initiatives you have around your aerial strategy.
So thanks for the question. We have a new initiative called 100,000 Strong, Chosen for Children. Our aim is to reach 100,000 people who've been impacted by trauma. And there's a reason for that, because we want to see change in our lifetime in the system. I'm going to come back and answer your question, Eric, but I see the same problems progress and persist in the system today that I witnessed with my brother 25 years ago. That's unacceptable. And the people of the kingdom have the greatest opportunity to influence change. And I believe that change is possible, but you have to reach numbers in mass. So that's a reason for 100,000 Strong, because there's a tipping point when you reach 16% of the affected population to actually produce change. And we're trying to move from a welfare system to a child and family well-being system that prioritizes relational connection and trauma responsive care. So that's the vision. That initiative is tied to the vision, and a huge part of it is that aerial strategy and being able to teach and train others. One of our trainings that we have developed, we spent a year developing this training, is specifically addressing problematic sexual behaviors. We're going to go deep, guys, for a minute on this. This is a very stark reality that is facing our population in disproportionate numbers. Problematic sexual behaviors can come from a history of sexual abuse. It can also be a trauma response to anxiety because of the experiences that a child has had in the past. But if a child is exhibiting problematic sexual behaviors, that prevents them from getting permanency. Because how many of you are signing up to bring a child who has that history in your home? You're going, nope, we've got other kids in our home. That's not safe. There's a boundary. Those kids end up aging out of foster care, typically going from one group home to another and experiencing more trauma along the way, hospitalizations, treatment facilities, et cetera. So it is a massive issue in our space of preventing kids from getting the permanency that we desire. And there's a healthy sexual behaviors and curiosity of development, and there's problematic. And when it becomes problematic, a child gets labeled, a stigma comes with that, and the rest is history. So this training that we have developed is specifically to address this and to educate. If a child has the appropriate intervention, statistically, there is a very high likelihood that does not have to define them for the rest of their life. You can teach a child and youth healthy body boundaries. You can set them up for success. And in the state that I live in, there's no training around this. The only training that exists for workers is reporting.
Mm-hmm.
That's unacceptable.
That's it.
And so we've developed a multi-tiered training around this called Displacing Shame. I love the name.
Yeah.
Displacing Shame. And there's five levels to it. There's a basic entry level that all people have to take. There's one that's for the faith-based audience, because how many of your church leaders are talking about this issue or know how to deal with this issue? They're kicking kids out of ministry because they're doing things they shouldn't be, right? So there's one for faith-based, there's one for parents and caregivers, there's one for state administrators, people who are running licensed agencies, and then there's one for the frontline staff workers who are in direct care. And that's a huge part of reaching this affected population for us, an initiative that we would love partnership. And because we want to produce this so that it can live on a learning management system and be on-demand access. That is how we're going to reach numbers in mass to deal with this training and this issue. When our staff developed it, they did an exhaustive search for the past 20 years of the resources that exist both in the church and in the state, and it's abysmal. There's not anything that's effective. We have a licensed practitioner who has developed it, and it is incredible. So...
And so just to give a little more context to our listeners, when I share the story of God coming and challenging me and reminding me that I didn't have $1 million to write checks for things, one of the things that was on my mind was I wanted so badly to be able to write a check to support this particular initiative. And so partly why we're here is to invite a listener or several listeners who are resonating with the heart behind this ministry. If God has provided for you in a way that you might not even understand why until this moment, I'm just going to ask. If God is stirring you to support this initiative because you can hear Jenni's heart. And the thing that strikes me, Jenni, about everything you're sharing today is continually pulling back and peeling down to the root of the issues. And I think it's so easy for us to see the result of things and to maybe not even realize how quickly we're passing judgment on a person or a situation or those types of things. And it's so beautiful to see your heart seeing into, and even the name chosen, right? These kids need to know they're chosen, and the parents need to know that they're seen and that they matter. And everything about what you're sharing today clearly is going deeper into what's really underlying here. Let's talk about the shame. Let's talk about what happens when we're not vulnerable or we don't understand that there are deep wounds and we're focused on these physical needs. And so I'm just struck. I'm mostly been quiet because I'm just I don't even know how to handle my own emotions in the midst of this conversation. Just this sense of, Lord, I wasn't even aware that the depth of what's happening, even though I've been around it and I've been in conversations with you and some of the others that are in this space. And I'm just struck by this opportunity for us as the church, as men and women who are listening to this podcast or been put in places of influence or provided with financial resources or abilities to come alongside you. And so I'm just going to invite people as you're hearing this to really wrestle with that. And Jenni, if you could just maybe even just share some specific things or ways that people could come alongside Chosen and support what you're doing.
Sure. So number one, if you are hearing this and you know a family that is struggling, it's probably worse than you know. And please share our website with them, chosen.care. We would love to come alongside a family, first of all. So that's always priority to me, that we're reaching the people who need the help that don't even know that we exist. Two, we'd love your prayer support. The reality is, oftentimes our peers say to us, man, y'all are in the deepest end of the ocean on this work. It is hard and messy. And I tell our team, like, we are just like Jesus. Jesus never shied away from going into the messiest parts of people's stories. And that is what we're walking into every day. People tell us things that they have never told anyone.
Yeah.
And it is hard. And so, for my team, prayers for my team, that they don't grow weary in doing good, but are able to also keep going as they're helping families to keep going. The spiritual resistance is real. The opposition to this work progressing and growing like it should is real, because the enemy hates the family. There's been an assault on families, obviously since the beginning of time, but even more so in the last 60 years in our country. And you can trace every bit of moral decay back to the breakdown of the family. So prayers just for our spiritual protection in doing this work. And then, of course, yes, Eric, if people would want to partner with us, you have resources. We have needs, real needs in the organization to reach children and families who are suffering from those wounds. And the beautiful thing is, in that 99%, that's flashy. It's a big impact number. But the beautiful thing is the reality of seeing God's redemptive hand restore health and change family trees. Like, there is nothing more beautiful than that. And the people who sow into it, there is a deposit that you're making into your own family when you're sowing into other families who are suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the opportunity this morning to sing the blessing over a family at a funeral for a man who was an incredible man of faith, who received Christ at a Billy Graham crusade, and it changed the history of his family. Right? And as you were sharing that, that's the picture, is this isn't just a stat for one person. This is generational transformation and chains that are being broken that have a ripple effect and have an
100%.
eternal impact, right? That's the beauty of what we're talking about here. It is hard work. It is, just in hearing your voice, I can tell just the burden that your team carries. And so we do invite people to truly pray for Chosen and be bold about it and understand that this work is eternal work. So absolutely, the enemy wants nothing to do with the things that are the chains that are being broken for generations through families, through the work that Chosen is doing. And so just thank you so much for sharing your heart and your story and the gifting. I just want to encourage you. It's so clear, the gifting that God has given you and the calling on your life. And it is beautiful to see how that is unfolding. And I just want to say, well done, good and faithful one. It's beautiful.
Thank you. It is the honor and privilege of my life. I'm so thankful to be in this space.
Jenni, I heard you say parental referrals, prayer, and partnership. And we just want to leave our listeners mindful of those three. Probably have caught now. I love alliterations, and you gave them to us well. I don't know if that was intentional or not for you, but thank you so much for sharing what it might look like to have other folks sent your way, who I won't forget this note, that things probably are worse than you know. That's striking for me right now. One of the deepest family connections that we have had in the Twin Cities, when we moved here about 4 years ago, is a family who has 3 children who are each adopted from the east and southern parts of the United States. And you made another mention of the behaviors are a signal of something deeper, and that's gonna stick with me. I'm wondering if you have a word for those families, to encourage and inspire them in their journey, because what I'm recognizing is that ripple effect is not just going to affect their immediate family, but those children now have the potential, when they become healthy, to then do something similarly and replicate it in their families. And so when I think about your partners and the imagination of the type of impact that they can have in partnering with you, we're talking about multitudes, right? But what word might you have kind of in parting for your parents who are on the journey right now?
I'm so glad you asked me this, because if they're listening or they hear this, they need it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say this: no child is beyond the hope of healing. Mm-hmm. No child. Y'all remember in the gospel when Jesus healed the man with a legion of 2,000,
mm-hmm.
possessed by demons, living in bondage in a cemetery? And then what does scripture say? That he was sitting in his right mind, worshiping the Lord after he was delivered. Like, no one is beyond the hope of healing. It is, we're in it for the long game. We are not we can't short circuit the healing process. It's a healing journey, right? If you have brokenness in your past, you know this firsthand, just like me, right? There are layers to it, but no child is beyond the hope of healing, and really parents and caregivers are the linchpin. So often we see that parents lose their empathy or their compassion for their child because it's so hard. And I want to tell you that we see you, and we know it's really hard, but this child is not trying to ruin your life. They're acting out of response to what has been done to them. And let's walk along this path of healing together and get you the tools and resources that you need to keep going.
Jenni, Eric is a music man, if you can't tell. As you were reflecting, the song that came to mind for me was generation song. May his blessings be upon you for 1,000 generations, and their children and their children and their children and their children. I want to thank you for giving us a tangible reminder of what that might look like. And even I'm mindful of your logo. I do some encouragement for students here at Bethel in terms of them seeing themselves as worthy, as image bearers of God. And what I'm reminded of in seeing those hands raised, a natural human response to a victorious moment in our lives, be it athletic or otherwise, is to raise our hands above our heads. And I think what y'all are doing is beautiful, and it's even capturing what you have envisioned in you all's logo. So, Jenni, thank you. Eric, let me pass it to you before tears start streaming down my eyes and we lose all control here. But Jenni, thank you.
Yeah. Again, we do thank everyone for joining in and listening to the story. Jenni, thank you so much for sharing about Chosen and for your faithfulness on this journey. And we just invite people to prayerfully consider coming alongside Chosen to lift up her team as she's shared with us today. And if you have someone in your life that God is prompting you to reach out to or to encourage, not just passing Jenni's name and contact information over, but you yourself, encouraging and coming alongside someone and letting them know that you see them and that you love them, even if you don't know how exactly to come alongside, just simply seeing people. And so with that, we thank you all, and God bless.
Thanks, guys. Great conversation.